So I just wanted to start off by saying I know this one's a long one. We're going to put chapters and timestamps below so you can skip to the parts you want. That being said, let's get on with it. These are going to be sweet. So these are the McCue RC Mantis high clearance links, and they're able to use behind the axle steering. So these are awesome. Well, we'll see if they're awesome. They seem like they're going to be awesome. We got some for the Gladiator, D17, so the Betty or the Deadbolt, and then the C10 and the Jeep JLU. We got some purple, green, yellow. We don't know what the Bronco's going to be, so we don't have those yet. We're going to start with our completely stock Deadbolt, just so that we have a baseline, and go ahead and get these Deadbolt ones installed on the Deadbolt. And we'll do some running videos and show some of the clearance and just kind of show how it performs compared to a completely stock. Then we may do the front axle or behind the axle steering on the stock Deadbolt. And we have a set of Injoras. We didn't get green ones, we just got some black ones. We might also just use this leftover one, I'm not sure yet. We'll see how they fit and then I'll let you know. But we'll do the behind the axle steering with the ultra high clearance Mantis links. So we have the Mantis links set out, and to install new links, you have to pull off all your wheels and tires. So we are doing that. Now to do links, it's pretty easy. All you have to do is pull out the screw here, pull out the screw here, especially since these are just the top end links, or I guess bottom links versus the top links. Top links are a little more difficult because they go under the drive shaft, and even then they're not too rough. But yeah, these are just simple 2 screws each, and we'll pull those out. Now, McCue says we do not need to install any sort of pivot balls or bushings or anything. Basically said that they don't need anything. They can just go in the way he designed it. They can just go in the way they designed it. You don't need any bushings, so we'll see how that goes. These are basically going to go in and set, obviously, the high end towards the body, and they put the links going inward towards the drive shaft. So basically they run alongside the drive shaft now. Okay, we'll get that installed and I'll show you again. All right, so you can see that's going to be a huge difference in clearance. Huge difference, right? So when you're going over rocks or any sort of ledge, your breakover angle is going to improve dramatically with these, because you get all this is no longer basically getting caught up. Now there could be some people may argue that there's issues where maybe you're not that this provides you the ability to just slide off of a rock easily, whereas these you might get hung up, but realistically you still got a little bit of an angle here, and your tires should be clearing any of this in here. So there's no way rocks, unless they're really, I guess, kind of tapering in and going specifically to those points where the rock is kind of jutting out, then maybe. But yeah, that's a pretty significant difference. It looks like it clears everything during articulation. You're not hitting your Y. You're not hitting your drive shaft. I mean, I think these are gonna be good. Let's go, keep going. Now, one thing of note, I'm not tightening these down super tight because these axles are plastic and they will pinch together. So you don't want to make them super tight. I mean, the screw is coming through enough. It's snug, but you want to make it super tight because then it will bind. You want to have just a little bit of play in there. That's okay. Just that little bit. but you definitely don't want to over tighten these. Also, you'll easily strip this out. So just be aware anytime you're installing links, especially on these stock axles, you do not want to over tighten because it'll bind by pinching, or you'll strip this out. Again, a little bit of play is okay. That's good. That helps with your articulation. You don't want too much. You don't want to be super sloppy, but you can tighten them down a little bit more if it's not enough. But you definitely don't want to over tighten, like I said. Same goes for this side. Now, getting these in here, I noticed there is a little bit of play in there because, again, you can't really pinch this down. There is definitely some play in there. So worst case, if we find that there's too much play, we can put a rubber grommet. A single, I wouldn't do two. A lot of aftermarket links come with two, or come with rubber grommets, and people put them on both sides on all mounting points, and that just causes tons and tons of binding. It just makes them so that it's just very stiff. So again, you want some play. Maybe I just need to tighten this one up over here, but it does seem like there's a little bit of, oh yeah, that's better. Yeah, so you'll basically, I think with these, you're probably just going to adjust the mounting points to the axles, because that's where you can get the most adjustment as far as how tight it is versus in here. And then again, worst case, if you don't like how much play there is, and I like quite a bit of play, as long as it's not causing my truck to shift while it's on a rock or on a side hill, or trying to articulate, and then you see it kind of jump or shift or something, and you know it's the links, then go ahead and put a rubber bushing in there or grommet. But I don't think we'll need them. They seems fine. We still have our stocks, and if you put aftermarkets in for the uppers here, you can make sure those are less play, and then you'll be just fine. Anyway, a lot of these trucks and setting them up, it's not always just put it together and it works, because there's a lot of personal preference that goes in. I mean, you can just put it together and usually it will just work. But again, there's some personal preference in how tight you want your links, how much play you want in your axle. See, a lot of this actually has to do with our shocks, right? There's in our upper links. The front doesn't have as much because it's just a 3-link versus a 4-link. So it's the upper links and the shocks. I mean, these links play into it too, but it all plays together. But again, you just have to decide for yourself, how much do you want, how much play do you want in there, and then adjust accordingly. Like I said, if you tighten these down a little more without over tightening, you can get rid of a lot of that super tight play in there. But again, you don't want to over tighten it so that it's not moving. You want it to move freely, right? That's the most important part, is that it moves freely. So you can see here on this last one, just a little bit of one turn back will change it from basically tight, right? This is pretty tight. And if I just turn it back, not even a whole turn, maybe a quarter to a half, it's a lot looser, right? And this is what you want. You want it loose like this. You want it to freely move, but you just want to avoid too much side to side. So again, you can just tighten it back up just enough to where there's not a lot of side to side, but then you can still kind of freely move here without it being stiff. Again, it's all personal preference. Okay, so yeah, it's gonna be a big difference, right? Going from essentially this to that. Much more space underneath. All right, so let's go ahead and just get the wheels and tires back on, and then we'll take her for a drive. Now, I do want to remind you, maybe this is your first upgrade or something along those lines, never over tighten your wheels, okay? Especially if you haven't, trimmed down the hex hubs, because you can trim down the hex hubs so that you can tighten these all the way down, almost completely tight against the hubs versus against the bearings. But again, you never want to over tighten. You should be able to freely move this stuff. I'm barely touching it, right? Like, you should be able to blow on it and they move. Right? I know, cheesy, but again, you can see I'm barely moving it, and the drive shaft's moving, just barely move it, right? So that means you're free and you're not bound up. If you bind these up and you try to run it and you run it hard, even if they're not completely bound up, you're just putting extra resistance on your motor and your ESC, and you'll easily fry it. So just be aware. All right, there we go. These look good on the stock deadbolt with the green. I love that. But you can see, look at that. Boom, just straight to the wheels, straight to the tires. That's a huge difference. Again, this was the before, right? It's a big difference. That's all the way in there. That's where they were. You know, crazy. All right, that's very cool. Let's see the fronts. The fronts would have been, well, we saw those before, but basically, right? It's kind of dark, sorry. But yeah, you get the point. So even without the behind the axle steering, this looks like it's going to be a huge upgrade. The behind the axle steering will be cool. It basically, the reason you can do that with these is because there's so much clearance now that you can put your steering links back here versus being in the front, which gives your approach angle, you know, a much better approach angle. You're losing this bar here. You still have your servo horn, you still have this link, but this guy here will be back in the back. So we'll see how that works when we get there. All right, we got it all hooked up now. We're plugged in. We can go take it for a drive. I just wanted to point something out though. You want to be sure, and I don't have the issue here, and maybe nobody will, but I just want to point this out because I am overly cautious. I like to make sure that things don't bind up. So always test run your stuff before you go out and actually run it. You want to bench run things, right? So look at our drive shaft here and look at our high clearance link. It almost looks like it's touching. However, it is not. It is very, very, very close though. And you want to kind of articulate and make sure that things are not touching. Okay. Now, depending on how you've set up your shocks, if you're able to go in even further, if you have more articulation that lets you come up higher, you may actually rub. Okay, but on the stock we're not. But it is very, very close. If you have an aftermarket drive shaft, you may rub. Okay. Now, that's not a big concern to me anyway. Some people may see it as a concern, but I don't understand that. The tolerances are very tight, and one thing you could easily do is just, you know, slightly sand off a little bit of the edge on the inside there. These are very bulky. They look like they're very strong, and they're how they should be, right? They're nice and bulky and thick without limiting your articulation. But if you do happen to rub on your drive shaft, again, taking a little bit off of that side on that link won't be an issue. In the back here, we have nothing touching. The drive shaft's not even close. So you're fully clear on all that stuff. Again, it's just this side of the drive shaft. Again, if you have an aftermarket drive shaft, maybe the U-joint's a little bit thicker, it's metal, it could very easily rub on that. If you have more articulation, it may actually rub on that as well. But again, always check on your bench. You don't want one of your U-joint, you know, teeth or, you know, one of the slots getting hooked on the sharp edge of this. You know, it's because it's square, and then breaking your U-joint. Just be sure. Always check. Oh, see, if I push real hard on here, actually, I can feel it rubbing. So it does rub a little bit if I push real hard, but under normal use, it's not going to rub. Okay. If we were going to permanently install these on this deadbolt, I would go ahead and probably on that top inner piece right there. Again, it's hard to see. We don't really have the light, but right there where it hits on the drive shaft. Again, I have to push really hard for it to do so, but we'll trim it. And hopefully the manufacturers, McCue, might see that, and they might take that into account on their printing. If they see that in our video here, maybe just lessen or chamfer the sides on the top. That way we have more articulation versus being a square box, just kind of chamfer it on the inside there. At least on that one side of that one link. This side, I don't think you'll ever have any issues on. So again, we're going on a little bit much, but I just wanted to point that out. So I wanted to show the C10 links on the all-wheel steering C10 that we've got. The purple looks pretty sharp. It's pretty cool. I love the color on these things. Definitely makes them stand out. I've heard some people say they wish they were aluminum or even brass. One thing to keep in mind, when you start putting metal links on here, especially soft metals like brass, it just actually gets caught up on the rocks. And it's like glue. It literally just sticks to the rocks. So plastic links are good. They're not a bad thing. So there's stock, right? Look at that. Okay. And then the high clearance. Look at that. That is huge. It's almost all the way to the body. That is a pretty wild difference. That is dramatic. So that's very exciting. We're going to see how the behind the axle steering works on the rears. We were told it should still work. There's plenty of space back here. As for the drive shafts, like the deadbolt, these do not seem to be even remotely close to the drive shafts. Now that may be in part due to our setup because this is not completely stock, so I can't say for certain on completely stock, but I assume it's very similar because we haven't changed that much here. It's just some hot racing shocks. But yeah, you can see there's plenty of clearance. I wish I had better light on there, but plenty of clearance for the drive shaft. It's not even close. And again, if it is, just chamfer that top part of the link on that side and you'll be good. So yeah, there's the ultra high clearance links and there's the stock links. And again, these are pretty stout. I don't see them breaking very easily, but we won't know until we run it hard. We probably won't have that in this video. We're just going to do some tests, some breakover angle stuff compared to stock on the deadbolt. We're not going to do it on the C10 because you'll get the idea with the deadbolt. But I just wanted to show on the C10 kind of that side to side difference comparison. All right, pretty awesome. I am liking these things a lot so far. And again, just because they're not brass doesn't mean they're bad. I mean, that's ridiculous. You don't want brass links. I saw some other manufacturers just release some brass links, and I'm like, that's literally just going to act as a way to catch on rocks and stick because brass is so soft. The plastic allows you to just, it's like slippery. It just slides. So if you do hit rocks, you're just going to slide. That's partly why the stock links are actually so good. As long as you're not breaking them, you're good to go. You kind of want that slick surface. Okay. So let's go ahead and just check out some of the deadbolt footage. A huge difference in how high the tire is comparatively. So this is completely stock. So you can see in situations like this, you're actually going to get hung up on your links fairly easily, right? And even here, this is just barely enough, but if that rock was any higher, right here, this lip, you'd be getting hung up pretty easily on that lip. And actually right here, it's hard to see, but on this side of the rock, you get high centered right there. There's no, you get high centered right there. So. Now that you've seen some of that, we're going to go ahead and install the behind the axle steering. We're going to use this Injora. We ordered a couple, so they're easy and cheap, and it's what they actually recommended, so I just got what was recommended. So we'll see how that goes. So first things first on this, you have to swap the knuckles. You basically flip the knuckles to the other sides. And we're going to go ahead and remove the steering linkage as well. So while your wheels and tires are off, it's a good time to check for any kind of binding in your wheel to your axle or your hub, just to make sure. I mean, you know I'm a stickler about checking for binding. And so even this one, I guess it's not too bad. This guy here, I'll see it's got a little bit of binding, just a little bit. And you know, I check this stuff every time I take them on and off. But when it's on here and there's actually the axle and the dog bone, you can't always tell, even though you can, it feels like it's good. Oh, you're good, but you can see a difference here, right? Compared to, so just take that opportunity just to kind of check it, and then you'll have an idea of how tight you really can get. Again, just a quarter turn back and you're going to see a world of difference. Yeah. Okay. So while you're at it, just always check that stuff. So now what we got to do is flip the steering knuckles to the other side and remount them. Easy peasy. You want to make sure you don't over tighten these as well. Always just back them off a little bit if it feels like it's a little tight. And stripping these out is real bad, so do not over tighten them. Okay, they should be very loose. Not so loose that they're gonna have a bunch of play in them or slop, or the screws are gonna fall out, but again, tighten them down until it feels tight. And if there's a little bit of resistance, that's fine. Back them off just a little bit, and then that's just perfect. Another thing I like to make sure of, and I already checked this, is, and I mentioned this in another video, and I don't know how much it actually matters, but make sure your axles are in phase, just like your drive shaft. Okay, I like to make sure that the dog bone is facing the same direction on both sides, which in this case it is. That way, when we're turning and there's any sort of binding on the dog bones, which kind of happens if you oversteer or your servo's oversteering, you don't have your endpoint set, or if your dual rate's up too high on your stock remote, you'll get it so it's kind of doing one of these as you're turning, and you'll see it kind of jump. That means you need to turn down on your dual rate or set your endpoints better on your steering. But to help minimize that, putting your dog bones in phase will at least keep them at the same rate. So as you're climbing and it's slowly turning, they're at least turning at the same versus kind of being off. Again, it may not matter much, but it's something I like to make sure. Okay, now that these guys are both in, we're going to go ahead and install the steering linkage that goes behind the axle. Now on these Injoras, we're going to have to install all the little balls into the ball cup and the bushings and whatnot. So we're going to go ahead and do that right now. So on these little ball joints, there's a larger diameter size side and a more narrow diameter side. Okay, I like to put the side that I'm going to put the screw in as the larger side. So this is our larger side, our screw's going in this way to mount to our steering knuckle. That way the link has no opportunity, and I'll do this with shocks too, right? Like you want this to be your outside, that way the shock has no way to come off. I've seen on used rigs that I bought, I've seen some people put just the O-ring on there and they expect the O-ring to hold it, and it'll hold, but it's not ideal. You want to put the larger flat side to the outside that's not mounted to anything, and then this will be mounted to your steering knuckle, or you know, whatever. If you were to mount it to this, you'd mount it in, and that way it's not going to come off, right? So just keep that in mind. Also, I put both O-rings on here. I'll do that on all the steering linkage. Generally, when I'm doing shocks, or especially long travel shocks, or some different links, depending on the link types, if there's any kind of binding, you can always just remove one of the O-rings. And again, my preference is to remove the O-ring that's on the outside, on the large flat side. That way there's still a shock or absorption between the whatever you're mounting and the mounting point. because that's probably where it's going to rub the most, is on the inside. I guess it also depends on how it's mounted, but I just like to keep that stuff in mind when I'm pulling it off. All right. So normally when you're assembling these linkages for the steering, you'll end up mounting this arm, right, for the servo here, and then your servo horn mounts here, and that's how this works. That is not how the behind the axle steering works. So I will show you here on the C10. We've already got it installed. Okay, the way this is going to work is your front linkage still mounts to your servo horn, and then it comes over, instead of to your crossbar here, it mounts to our new link. Okay, and that link is actually mounting right here to our steering knuckle. So this is where you have to use a little bit longer screw for the steering knuckle, and then you have to use the longest screw, which is one of the ones that comes with your linkage. This is the one they mentioned on their website for the Mantis links. You have to use a long screw here, and it's going to go through your new link to your regular long steering link, and then to your knuckle. All right, so that's how it's going to go. By the way, we get this on front and rear. Give it a look-see. Front and rear behind the axle. Pretty spiffy. All right, so let's go ahead and get it on here. So really the first thing we need to do is mount our new link. And just so you know, this is the way it goes. This is the top side. This is the bottom side. And we're going to mount like this onto the knuckle. Now, something I need you to be aware of, because you're using a long screw here, you can go all the way through the steering knuckle into your axle housing, which then you're not going to be able to see very well because it's not very bright. But you actually could have the screw end up hitting your dog bone, and that'll bend your dog bones, break your dog bones, bind up real bad, break drive shafts, all kinds of bad stuff. So you need to make sure that this is clear before you try to actually run the truck. Again, test fit everything, make sure you look, make sure you try to, if you're gonna try to run it, you can just run it with your hand and make sure it's not binding on that up there. Again, the dog bone could easily hit onto the screw coming through if your screw goes through too far. Now, what I would do is if you are going through too far with the screw that came with your set, you can trim it or Dremel it off so that it's just far enough to go through to the axle housing. Again, don't over tighten this. You probably could even leave this loose. It doesn't need to go all the way down. As long as the top end isn't hitting on anything, you should be good. So just be aware that that could happen if you're not careful. So the next thing we're going to install is our main steering linkage in the rear. And then on this side, you can see that that linkage is going to go right in between your steering knuckle and your new link. And then you're going to mount all three of those together. I'll be honest. These hinged bodies are awesome if you just need to get in there real quick. But when you're working on stuff, I hate them. And yeah, I could have just popped it off. Maybe I should have, but I guess I'm lazy tonight. All right, so that's our top link, the new link that we added, and then our steering link. And then it's going to go into our steering knuckle where the link normally goes. All right, and again, now we've got our steering in the rear. Just make sure it's not bound up. Everything feels nice. Loose, but not too loose. Tighten each side a little bit. Yeah, beautiful. Okay, so you can see from the front now, we've got our linkage all set up, and it turns both wheels. Pretty slick little setup. Our ultra high clearance link Mantises aren't in the way at all. We have full articulation. Okay, it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing. All right, let's go ahead and install our servo and front link, essentially. Now, again, because we're using the linkage, the screws that came with the linkage, a lot of these screws are too long, and I would recommend using more appropriately sized screws if you have them. If you don't, you can always just trim them. So this one's a good example, right? It's too long. It probably could use a trim. If you've got a shorter screw from your original kit, then just go ahead and use a shorter screw from your original kit. The most important screw from a length standpoint, like I said, is this screw here. That's your steering knuckle screw on the top. That's going through your new linkage and your steering knuckle and your axle housing. You want to make sure it doesn't go in and get caught on your dog bone. All right, so that screw, if you have a shorter one, I think there's like 3 different lengths. If you have the medium length, that's what I would use here, and you can use your long lengths everywhere else. Make sure you do not over tighten your servo horn. This is very, very important and would be very detrimental to your servo, especially these stock ones. I have a video about those. I'll link it right over there, right there. And you can see what happens if you over tighten these stock servos. So just be very careful not to do that. Okay. You may have to adjust your trim some. I'm not worrying about it right now. I would have normally turned this all on and made sure that our servo is straight. But I'm pretty sure we're good here. Worst case, we can adjust the trim. But again, this isn't a permanent installation. This is just my demo truck to demo new products on from a stock standpoint. So we're not going to worry about that right now, but you should probably turn on your receiver and your transmitter and make sure your servo is centered, set your trim to 0, and then go ahead and set your servo horn. That's the proper way to do that. But I think we are good. Let's go ahead and plug it in and turn it on. Yeah, we're a little off there, but that's okay. So that's fantastic. It's working. Again, all of our clearances are good. One thing, again, to remember is make sure our dog bone's not binding on this one here. Okay, I just wanted to show the different screw sizes for the purpose of this video. This is what comes with the Endura links. This is your stock knuckle screw. These are the same size. This is the screw you actually want for your new knuckle, to replace the old knuckle screw where your new link goes. So unfortunately, nothing comes with, the link kit and both link kits, steering link kit and the high clearance link kit does not come with this. So you'll have to use this screw, and I'd recommend trimming it down to this length. Okay. Or like I said, if you've already got some screws that came with your rig or other parts you've bought, use this medium-sized screw. This one's not long enough. This one's too long. And even this one, when you put it in, you've got to be very, very careful to not go all the way through to the dog bone. All right. For the purpose of this video, we're going to use the one that came with, just so you can see it and that it is functional with only the stuff that came with the Endura kit and the high clearance links. So I know I'm stressing this a lot, but I just wanted to see if I could show you here. You can see there's a tiny screw up in there. And that if your dog bone hits on that screw, you can see it right there. See that screw? And your dog bone spins and you get caught on that screw, you're going to probably break something. It'll completely stop the rig. It will, or it'll pop your dog bone pin out, or bend the screw, or bend your axle. Again, it's very hard to see. I apologize. Wish I had a better way to show it. But you can see that tiny little shiny screw in there and the dog bone. As the dog bone turns, it'll hit that screw. Okay, so you just need to make sure you back it out just far enough to where it's not poking through your axle. All right, we're good to go. You can see how much of the screw is still protruding right here and on this one here. Again, I'd recommend just getting some smaller screws that came with your kit or other parts, or cut these down, mark them off, figure out how long they need to be, cut them down. All right. That binding issue on your dog bone with the screws, that can happen with stuff even outside of this kit, with different knuckles or different axles. Make sure your screws aren't hitting on your dog bones with anything, any sort of new installation. Even your stock might be able to go through far enough. I'm not sure, I've never actually tried and looked at it, but the stock might, if you screw it down too tight, you might actually be able to go all the way through. You'd be binding your steering, but you might be able to drive straight and then hit it, and again, world of hurt. So we are done. We are all set up. We are good to go. We have all the clearances. Everything's good. One thing I wanted to point out about this setup, while it is awesome, is if your shocks are laid back too much for this kit, you'll notice that it'll hit on your new linkage. Okay, there's some, when you turn like this, your shock might hit on the back of the linkage. Now, I'll show you on the C10. Okay, so our shocks lay about like so. If I was to go back to here, I do think that they would end up hitting on the linkage when you turn right. Okay, this little hook right here essentially as it goes underneath the shock. Okay, we're not hitting now, everything is clear, but again, if you have more of an extreme angle on your shocks or a different kind of setup, that could be something to be aware of. And maybe you could Dremel it out, you know, and do some custom work to it to get it to work, but just be aware of that. The setup isn't meant for extreme droop or, you know, laid shocks, and they mention that when you're purchasing it. This side has no issues. I mean, you'd have to be laying very, very, very flat to be hitting your steering link here. It's just mainly this additional steering link, this cross link. All right, I just wanted to point that out. So again, the main purpose of this, to move your steering from the front to behind the axle, is it gives you a much cleaner approach angle, right? So as you're coming in and you're approaching a rock or something, you know, if the rock juts out at all, you will catch your bottom steering link quite often. You'll see it get scratched up, and again, you get hooked on that quite often. So this gives you the opportunity to remove that and get that little bit of extra space between here and here clear. So that's really the point. It's also just kind of cool, but there is a functionality reason to it. And again, that's to clear this space. These links so far seem awesome with or without the behind the steering or behind the axle steering. So, and the only way to be able to do that is with links that clear it enough to where you could actually put the steering link on top of the axle or on top of the chassis links. All right. So this is what the behind the axle steering link change. So basically on rocks like this is where you're going to see a difference, where you're coming up and there's an angle to the rock and you start to hit it like this, you're going to see you're not going to hit your steering linkage, right? Normally that would hit your lower steering link. Now you're not going to, you're going to hit higher first. So that's the thing to keep in mind on the benefit of something like this. You know, going up in like this angle as well, you're hitting your pumpkin before you hit your steering link. And if this was even more of a dramatic incline, you would definitely be hitting your steering link first, right? Your lower steering link anyway. Like this as well, right? If you're coming up on an angle here, where it's kind of the corner of a rock, right? This will help prevent you from hitting your steering linkage. And you gotta remember too, that's helping your steering. And so if you're sitting on your steering linkage, your steering is gonna suffer, right? It's gonna have more resistance. You know, you're just gonna be scraping on the rock. This helps reduce that so you get more tire contact. Again, that's the whole point. More tire contact before you end up hitting steering linkage essentially. And same as here, right? Same as your actual links. The whole point is to maintain tire contact, not hitting the links. Stock links will be hitting right there, right? These links are not hitting. It's a huge difference. I don't know how anybody could argue otherwise in that regard. You can argue quality, you know, some people may want them aluminum or something along those lines, but the design itself is pretty genius. I mean, if you've got thoughts on that, tell me in the comments below what the downside of this may be from a design standpoint. Not the materials, not the quality. Let's say they're the highest quality material, highest quality, you know, everything about them. What is the drawback to a design that gives you the most possible clearance? I can tell you one might be it may not fit your design of your suspension, right? So if you got, like I said, an extreme setup, it may not work well with that. Definitely the behind the axle steering will suffer, you know, if you have an extreme droop setup or something along those lines. But the links themselves, I don't know. I can't really think of a whole lot of drawback to the actual design. So I'm liking them. I am liking them quite a bit. All right, so I know that was a long one. Hopefully we had a lot of good information in there for you, and this video really helps you out and tells you whether or not these are for you. I personally think these links are awesome, and for the rigs that they make sense on, I'm gonna go ahead and put it on them. I love the color options, and I know they're hand painted, but there are a ton of color options, so you wanna definitely check out the listings and see the different color options. And McCue RC was really helpful, very accommodating, so I don't think you have any issues with your order, or if you had some questions to ask, go ahead and ask them. As for the contest and the giveaway, you can win yourself a set of these links for free. We'll send them out to you. Here's how you're gonna win. Basically, I wanna hear what rig you're gonna put them on. Tell me the color of your rig, the type of body and chassis you're running, as well as the color of links you'd put on there, and put it in the comments below. Once this video hits 1,000 views, so you gotta share the video around. Once it's got 1,000 views, we'll randomly pick a winner. You'll have to have subscribed, and of course, like I said, comment with your type of rig you're running. Yeah, so go ahead and comment. Tell me what you thought of the video and anything else. And then, like I said, good luck to everybody out there that trying to win. So let's hit 1,000 views on this video real quick. All right, take care.